Liam sat on his couch, scrolling through endless listings of used cars. It was a dull Saturday afternoon, just like every other day since he lost his job. His old car had finally broken down, and with money running low, buying a second-hand one seemed like the smartest choice. Most of the ads looked the same basic descriptions, a few pictures, nothing special. But then, one caught his eye. It was an old sedan, listed at a surprisingly low price. The description was short, almost too vague, with no pictures, just a phone number. Something about it felt off. Normally, Liam ignored sketchy listings, but for some reason, he couldn't stop staring at this one. Curiosity got the best of him. He dialed the number. A deep, tired voice answered almost immediately. The man on the other end didn't say much, only giving an address and telling Liam to come in the morning. No details, no small talk. Just directions. The next day, Liam drove to the outskirts of town, where the address led him to an old, run-down house. The yard was overgrown, and the place looked abandoned. He hesitated, but before he could rethink his decision, the front door creaked open. An older man stepped out. His face was lined with deep wrinkles, his eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in years. He held out the keys with a firm grip. "No returns," he muttered. Liam had no idea that taking those keys would change everything. Jake stood in front of the old house, gripping his jacket as a cold breeze sent a chill down his spine. The place looked even worse, up-close peeling paint, broken windows covered with wooden planks, and an eerie silence that made his skin crawl. He double-checked the address. This was definitely the right place. Before he could knock, the front door creaked open. An older man stepped out, his eyes dark and sunken, his face worn with deep lines. He didn't smile. He didn't even look surprised to see Jake. Without a word, he walked past him toward the driveway, motioning for Jake to follow. There it was, the car from the ad. A faded blue sedan, rust creeping along the edges, but overall, it looked drivable. The man held out the keys, his grip unusually tight. "No returns," he muttered, his voice hoarse and almost. Warning, Jake hesitated. Something about this whole thing felt off. The man's expression, the rushed handoff, it didn't feel like a normal sale. But the price was too good to pass up. He reached out, took the keys, and slid into the driver's seat. The old man didn't say another word. He just turned and walked back inside, slamming the door behind him. Ethan pulled out of the driveway, gripping the steering wheel tightly. The car ran fine, but something about it felt strange. Maybe it was just the weird way the old man had acted, or maybe it was the fact that the car had sat untouched for who knows how long. Either way, an uneasy feeling settled in his chest. As he drove, a faint smell filled the car, damp, earthy, like wet dirt after a storm. It wasn't overpowering, but it was enough to make him roll down the windows. Probably just an old car smell, he told himself. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. By the time he got home, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the driveway. Ethan parked and turned to grab his bag when something in the rearview mirror caught his eye. A small glint of light, something metallic, wedged deep under the back seat. His heart skipped. What was that? He reached back, trying to grab it, but it wouldn't budge. He yanked harder, but it was stuck. Frustrated, he sighed and gave up. He'd deal with it in the morning. But that night, as he lay in bed, the smell lingered in his nose. The image of that glimmering object wouldn't leave his mind. No matter how hard he tried to ignore it, one thought kept creeping back. What if it wasn't just a lost coin or some old piece of junk? What if it was something more? The next morning, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he had to figure out what was hidden beneath that back seat. Armed with a flashlight and a screwdriver, he was ready to get to the bottom of it. The smell, now stronger and more distinct, hit him as soon as he opened the door. It was earthy, damp, and something else he couldn't quite place, like something was rotting inside. He slid into the back seat, his flashlight flicking across the cushions as he tried to get a better angle. When he tugged at the seat, it suddenly lifted, revealing a small, hidden compartment underneath. His heart raced as he carefully reached inside. There it was, a metal box, rusty and old, no bigger than a shoebox. Ethan froze for a second, unsure if he should open it. Why would someone hide this here? And why hadn't the old man said anything about it? His hands were shaking as he pried open the box. Inside were weathered papers, scribbled with strange symbols that made no sense to him. But there was something else, a small old notebook, its pages crinkled with age. Ethan's curiosity grew, and against his better judgment, he opened the notebook. The more he flipped through the pages, the more unsettled he felt. The writing was wild, almost frantic, filled with strange drawings and words that didn't seem to belong. But the worst part was yet to come. The bottom of the box were car keys that didn't belong to this car at all. What was going on here? As Ethan flipped through the pages of the notebook, his eyes stopped on one page that made his stomach turn. Buried between scribbled notes and strange symbols was a photo. It was old, the edges yellowed and the image slightly faded. The photo showed a group of people standing in front of a house, one that looked eerily familiar. His heart skipped a beat as he stared at the house. It was the same house where he had bought the car. But there was something even stranger about the photo. In the center, standing with the group, was the same old man who had sold him the car, only much younger. But that wasn't the most unsettling part. In the corner of the picture, barely noticeable in the shadows, was the car. His car. The same blue sedan, down to the scratch on the door. Ethan blinked, not sure if he was seeing things. This photo had to be taken decades ago, yet there it was, the car, unchanged after all that time. He leaned in closer, his fingers trembling. As he studied the photo, something else caught his eye. There was a woman in the picture, standing beside the car. Her face was twisted in fear, her eyes wide with terror. Ethan's blood ran cold. What was going on here? How could this photo exist if the car hadn't been in the family that long? Something was wrong, and Ethan couldn't ignore it any longer. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the photo, the notebook, and the mysterious car. Everything seemed to point to one thing: the house, the old man, and the terrifying secrets hidden inside the car. He had to know more. It was time to go back. His heart pounded as he drove to the house, his thoughts racing. He knew he should walk away, forget about the car and everything it came with, but something pushed him forward, a need to understand what was going on. When he arrived, the house looked even worse than before. It was as if time had sped up and aged it overnight. The windows were boarded up tighter, and the yard, already overgrown, was now nearly impassable. It was as if the house was trying to hide. Ethan knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He waited a moment, then tried again. Still nothing. Something didn't feel right. He walked around the back of the house, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of the old man behind the house. He spotted a shed, its door hanging slightly open. Without thinking, Ethan approached. As soon as he stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind him, trapping him in complete darkness. His breath quickened as his flashlight flickered on, revealing rusty tools and old broken furniture. But there, tucked in the corner, was another metal box, just like the one he'd found in the car. What was inside? Ethan had to find out, even if it scared him. Ethan's hand shook as he reached for the metal box. The smell that hit him when he opened it made his stomach churn. Something was rotting inside. He tried to hold back his nausea. As he peeked inside, what he saw made his blood run cold. Inside the box were more photographs, but these weren't like the ones in the car. These were worse. They showed the same people from the old photo, the ones standing in front of the house. But this time, the people weren't smiling. They were lying on the ground, their eyes wide open in horror, frozen in terror. Ethan stared at the photo of the young woman, the one he'd seen in the picture with the car. She was in this one too. Her face twisted in fear, just like before. His mind raced. How was this possible? What was the connection? He grabbed the last photo at the bottom of the box. His heart stopped. The car was in the photo again. But this time, the trunk was open. Ethan could barely make out something. Inside it looked like a body. He felt a cold chill run down his spine. Suddenly he heard footsteps approaching from outside. Panic surged through him. He wasn't alone anymore. Before he could react, the door to the shed creaked open, and there stood the old man, his face twisted with anger. "You shouldn't have come back," the man growled, his voice filled with rage. Ethan's heart was pounding in his chest as the old man stepped into the shed, his eyes wild with anger. "You shouldn't have come back," he snarled, his voice shaking with fury. Ethan took a step back, the flashlight trembling in his hand. "What is all this?" he demanded, his voice shaking but filled with confusion and fear. "Who are these people? What's going on?" The old man's expression darkened. "They were like you," he said, his voice low and cold. "They thought they could figure it out, unlock the secret. But they were wrong." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "What secret?" he asked. He was starting to realize that this wasn't just about the car. It was something bigger, something far worse. "The car," the old man said, his voice nearly a whisper. "It's cursed. Everyone who's driven it has disappeared. The car doesn't let them go." Ethan's blood turned to ice. The pieces were finally falling into place, the strange smell, the hidden box, the photographs. Everything pointed to one horrifying truth. The old man continued, his voice growing more frantic. "I needed someone to take it, someone to lift the curse before it's too late." Ethan could hardly breathe as the weight of the old man's words sank in. The car was cursed, and now it had chosen him. He had to escape, but the fear of what was coming next kept him frozen in place. Panic surged through Ethan as the old man's words echoed in his ears. The car was cursed. His mind raced. He had to get away before it was too late. Without thinking, he turned and bolted from the shed, his breath coming in quick gasps. He ran toward the car, his footsteps pounding the ground. His hands were shaking as he yanked open the door and jumped inside. The engine roared to life, but his heart was racing faster than the car could move. Ethan slammed the gas pedal to the floor, speeding down the road. His mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. He thought he'd escaped, but something wasn't right. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was following him. Just as he glanced at the passenger seat, his phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed on the screen, and his stomach twisted. He hesitated, but then answered it. A cold voice came through the speaker. "You think you're free? You're not. The car won't let you go." The line went dead. Ethan's blood ran cold as he looked up into the rearview mirror. His heart stopped. There, sitting in the back seat, was the young woman from the photographs, her eyes wide, lifeless, staring straight at him, in horror. Ethan slammed on the brakes, but the car jerked on its own, pulling him toward a familiar road, one he'd passed before. The road where he had first found the cursed car. He couldn't escape. The car had already chosen him. Ethan's grip on the steering wheel tightened as the car swerved, its movements jerky and out of his control. No matter how hard he tried to steer, the car pulled him down the road, toward the same place he had come from. It was like the car knew where it wanted to go, and it wasn't going to stop until it got there. He glanced back at the rearview mirror, his breath catching in his throat. The young woman was still there, her face pale and lifeless. Ethan's heart raced. How was she still in the car? How was this even possible? His mind screamed for him to get out, but his body wouldn't listen. The car was taking over, and there was nothing he could do. The familiar road stretched ahead, and Ethan knew where it was leading, the same house where he had found the car. He had been there before, but now everything felt different. The air was thick with dread, and the car seemed to be pulling him toward his doom. Every inch of him wanted to fight back, to get out of this nightmare, but the car wouldn't let him. It was like the curse had wrapped its cold, invisible hands around him, trapping him inside. The road twisted and turned, and there was no escaping it. Ethan realized then that he wasn't driving anymore. The car was driving him.